and Hamlet comes in reading. Polonius says, how are you, Hamlet? And Hamlet says, I'm well. And Polonius says, do you know me, my lord? Because he knows that Hamlet has been mad. So he's, just checking up on his mental state. And Hamlet says, yes, I know you very well. You're a fishmonger. You sell fish. And Polonius says, no, I don't. And Hamlet says, then I would you were so honest a man. I wish you were as honest as a fishmonger, a fish seller. And Polonius is a bit insulted by this and says, honest? And Hamlet says, aye, sir, to be honest, as this world goes, is to be one man picked out of 10,000. So he's saying that only one man out of every 10,000 is an honest man. So it's a bit of a sad reflection here on how he's seeing the world and his opinion towards human nature at this point. And Polonius agrees with him, yes, only 1 in 10,000 men are honest. And Hamlet starts to talk about corruption as a result. He says, if the sun breeds maggots in a dead dog, being a god kissing carrion, and then the mention of kissing distracts him, and he says to Polonius, have you a daughter? And Polonius says, yes. And Hamlet says, let her not walk in the sun. Conception is a blessing, but not as your daughter may conceive. So he's giving Polonius some advice, saying that he should look after Ophelia better. This is because of his bitterness against his mother. He's worried that women are untrustworthy and lustful. So he's basically saying you can't trust Ophelia on her own, you better look after her. And Polonius, as an aside to the audience, says, how say you by that? Still harping on my daughter. So he's excited by the fact that Hamlet has brought up Ophelia because he thinks it proves that he is in love with her. And then he says, yet he knew me not at first. He said I was a fishmonger. He's far gone, far gone. So he's totally mad. And then he says, but in my youth, I suffered much extremity for love. I'll speak to him again. So he's going to try again and see if he can get more information out of Hamlet. And Hamlet says that he's reading words. And Polonius asks what the matter is, what the content of the words are. But Hamlet deliberately misunderstands him and says, well, what's the matter between who? And Polonius says, no, what's the matter that you read? And Hamlet says it's slander because the author who has written has said that old men have grey beards, they have wrinkled faces, they have tearful eyes, and that they are stupid. And then he says, which I believe, but I don't think it's honest to have written it. So he's actually insulting Polonius here because he's talking about Polonius when he says that. Polonius is the old man who he is describing. And so Polonius, as an aside again, says, though this be madness, yet there is method in it, which is one of the famous lines of the play. So this aside recognises that what Hamlet is saying actually does have meaning. He might be pretending to be mad, but all it's doing really is allowing him to be openly rude to Polonius, because what he's saying still does make some sense. Then he says, will you walk out of the air, my lord? Meaning, will you come outside with me? And Hamlet says, I'll walk out of the air into my grave. And Polonius says, yes, that is out of the air. And then aside again, he says how pregnant sometimes his replies are, a happiness that often madness hits on, with which reason and sanity could not so prosperously be delivered of. So he's saying his replies have a lot of meaning, and there's a calmness and a serenity that comes with madness that he has, that people don't have when they're sane. And then he says, I'm going to leave him and contrive the means of meeting between him and my daughter. So he decides that he's going to go ahead with his plan to make Ophelia and Hamlet bump into each other while he's listening. And then he says to Hamlet, my honourable lord, I most humbly take my leave of you. And Hamlet says, you cannot, sir, take from me anything that I will more willingly part with all, as in, I can't wait for you to go, I'm so bored of you, get lost. And then he says, accept my life, accept my life, accept my life. So he's saying that he would be more willing to die than he would be willing for Polonius to leave him. And considering how much he wants Polonius to leave him, that's quite a strong thing to say. So the repetition there makes it clear that he still has that sense that he would really like to stop existing. So we know he's not really suicidal. He establishes that he's not suicidal in that first soliloquy where he says that the everlasting has fixed his canon against self-slaughter. So he's ruled suicide out as an option. So he's not considering suicide. What he's saying, though, is that he would like to cease to exist, which is a slightly different thing. So Polonius says, good. And then Hamlet says, these tedious old fools, because he's just so sick of having to talk to Polonius. And then Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come in. Polonius says, there's Hamlet. And they say thank you, and Polonius leaves. Guildenstern and Rosencrantz say hello to Hamlet. Hamlet's pleased to see them and says, how are you? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern make a comment about the Wheel of Fortune. They say that they're indifferent, they're in the middle. They're not at the top or the bottom of the wheel. So they're not the button on Fortune's cap, they're not at the top, they're not the luckiest people, but they're not in the soles of her shoe either. So the fact that they've personified Fortune here, so they are talking about it as a wheel where there's a top and a bottom, but they've personified it so that the top is Fortune's hat and the bottom is Fortune's shoes. And Hamlet turns this into a bit of a dirty joke, where he says, so you live in the middle of Fortune, and Guildenstern says, yes, we live in her privates, and Hamlet says, oh, you live in the secret parts of Fortune, and he calls Fortune a strumpet. So the personification here shows Hamlet's attitude towards fate, and his idea that fate can be controlled if you treat it right. That idea that you can somehow bring it around to your bidding, like a strumpet if you pay it. And then he says, what's going on? And Rosencrantz says, oh, the world's grown on. And Hamlet says, no, that's not true. And then he says, in particular, what are you doing here? Why have you come to prison? And Guildenstern says, prison. Hamlet says, Denmark is a prison. And Rosencrantz says, well, then the whole world is a prison. And Hamlet says, yeah, it is. It's a good prison where there are lots of different types of confines, wards and dungeons, but Denmark is one of the worst. And Rosencrantz says, we don't think it is. And Hamlet says, why then it isn't a prison to you. If you don't think it's a prison, then it's not for you. For there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So he's saying that perspective is everything. There's no such thing as something being purely good or purely bad in itself. It's based on your perspective of that thing. So for him, Denmark is a really bad place to live right now, but he recognises that for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, that's not true. So this is quite a humanistic thing to say, quite philosophical as well. Then they just talk about why Hamlet might be so upset, and Hamlet is sort of not really giving them real answers. And then Hamlet comes back to the question that he's been asking them since they arrived. What makes you at Elsinore? Why are you here? Why have you come? And Rosencrantz lies. To visit you, my lord, no other occasion. And Hamlet says, beggar that I am even poor in thanks, but I thank you, and sure, dear friends, my thanks are too dear a halfpenny. So he says, oh, thank you so much, I really appreciate you coming. And then he says, were you not sent for? Is it your own inclining? Is it a free visitation? Come, deal justly with me. Come, nay, speak. So these questions, he clearly knows that they have not come of their own free will. He knows that there is something behind their appearance here. And he asks them, please, deal justly with me, treat me in a way that's fair, tell me the truth. And Guildenstern says, what should we say? And Hamlet says, well, you're saying anything but answering the question, anything but to the purpose. And he says, you were sent for. There is a kind of confession in your looks which your modesties have not craft enough to colour. So he says, you might not be willing to tell me, but I can see, I know from your body language that I've got it right, you have been sent for. And he says, I know the good king and queen have sent for you. And Rosencrantz still doesn't admit it. He still says, to what end, my lord? Why would they do that? And Hamlet says, that you must teach me. So you better tell me why they brought you here. And he says, let me conjure you, let me ask you, let me beg of you. By the rights of our fellowship, by the consonancy of our youth, by the obligation of our ever-preserved love, and by what more dear a better proposer could charge you withal, be even and direct with me, whether you were sent for or no. So now he's asked them, and he's used cumulation here to really stress the importance of this to him. So he says, I'm asking you by the rights of our fellowship, so I'm asking you based on the friendship that we've shared. I'm asking you by the consonancy of our youth. I'm asking you by the time that we have spent together throughout our childhood. I'm asking you by the obligation of our ever-preserved love. So I'm asking you based on the strength of the friendship and the bromance that we have for each other. He says, on the basis of all of these things, be honest with me, were you sent for? And again, Rosencrantz replies with an aside to Guildenstern, where he says, oh, should we tell him? What say you? And Hamlet straight away also has an aside, where he says, nay then, I have an eye of you, if you love, and then says to Guildenstern, if you love me, hold not off. So his aside, nay then, I have an eye of you, he's saying, aha, I've sorted you out. I've asked you a direct question, you avoided it as often as you can, and then when I've really pushed it to you, you kind of turn aside and whisper to each other. So he's saying, I have an eye of you, I know I've sorted you out, I know what you're doing. This is where he's realised that they have betrayed him. This is the moment of betrayal, because simply showing up to deal with Claudius and Gertrude, that in itself is forgivable, but the fact that they haven't just straight up been honest with him about the fact that that's why they're there and that's what they're doing, that to Hamlet is a betrayal. And then Guildenstern admits, my lord, we were sent for, and Hamlet says, I will tell you why, so shall my anticipation prevent your discovery, and your secrecy to the king and queen moult no feather. So he says, I know you were sent, and I know why, and I'm going to tell you why so that you don't have to tell me, and that way you don't have to break any promises of secrecy to the king. He says, I have of late, but why, I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. So he's saying, lately, and I don't know why, I've become really miserable, and in fact, I'm so miserable that the earth, this goodly frame, seems to me a sterile promontory. So the beautiful earth seems sterile and empty. This most excellent canopy the air, look you, this brave overhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire. So he's gesturing to the sky here and he's saying, look at this beautiful sky, this amazing roof, this extraordinary, place that we live in. And he's saying, why, it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapours. So it seems disease-filled, corrupted. It seems dreadful. And then he says, what a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. So he's saying, mankind is extraordinary, we're amazing, we're in between beasts and gods, and we're closer to gods than we are to beasts. We've got the joy of having them looking up to us, we've got the joy of thinking, we've got the joy of looking forward to moving into heaven. We've got the beauty of the world around us. And then he says, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me. So he says, despite all of this, despite all of these amazing things in the world, to me, all it is dust. I have no pleasure in anything. So you can see here in this speech, he sets up his understanding of how other people are perceiving the world as a positive, amazing place, and probably how he experienced it before the death of his father. But now he can't experience it like that anymore, and he's miserable. So he is actually being honest with them here about how he's feeling. He ends by saying that woman delights him neither, though by your smiling you seem to say so. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern kind of are obviously teasing him and suggesting by their body language and their expression that perhaps he is unhappy about a woman, that it is love that's ruined things. And Rosencrantz sort of says, my lord, there was no such stuff in my thoughts, I wasn't thinking that. And Hamlet says, why did you laugh then when I said man delights not me? And Rosencrantz says, to think, my lord, if you delight not in man, what Lenten entertainment the players shall receive from you. So he says, hey, there are some actors on their way here, and if you're not delighted by man, then the actors will be very poorly received by you. You'll send them away. And Hamlet says, he that plays the king shall be welcome. His majesty shall have tribute of me. The adventurous knight shall use his foil and target, the lover shall not sigh gratis, the humorous man shall end his part in peace, the clown shall make those laugh whose lungs are tickled of the seer, and the lady shall say her mind freely, or the blank verse shall halt for it. So he's just going through all the different characters that the actors might play and saying that he'll be very polite and friendly and welcoming to them. Although it's interesting that he chooses to start with the actor who is playing the king, because of course he sees Claudius as being an actor who's playing as being a king, as a result of his knowledge of Claudius killing King Hamlet. And then he says, what players are they? Who? And Rosencrantz says the actors that you used to like in the city. And Hamlet says, well, why are they travelling from the city? This whole section here, guys, is a bit of a dip into a in-joke of the politics of the time. And so Shakespeare's actually making a comment here about acting in the time period, because it was very competitive. Basically, he's just saying that there are children who do acting, and they're making it harder for the adults who do acting to sort of compete, because the children get all of the crowds and the attention, and that they're actually physically fighting over who gets the space. And then as a result, these actors have chosen to come to Elsinore to get away from the children actors so that they can kind of actually earn some more money. So his contemporary audience would have understood that, and it's not really relevant to us anymore. So I'm just going to skip down to where the trumpets flourish and the players arrive. And Hamlet says to them, to Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, you're welcome in Elsinore. He asks them for their hands. He wants to shake their hands. And he says, look, I'm going to be polite and welcoming to the players in a minute, and I want you to feel more welcomed. And then he says, you are welcome here in Elsinore, but my uncle father and my aunt mother are deceived. So by conjoining the terms uncle and father and aunt and mother, it makes them very contemptuous, because it makes the incestuous link between Gertrude and Claudius more heavily emphasised. And so Guildenstern says, in what, my dear lord, what are they deceived in? And Hamlet says, I am but mad north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. So this is him telling them openly that he is not actually mad, that he is pretending to be mad. But he has couched it in metaphorical language, so it's entirely possible that they haven't understood what he means. Polonius comes in and says, hi. And Hamlet says to Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, listen to this, guys. At each ear a hearer. That great baby you see there is not yet out of his swaddling clouds. So he says to them, I'm gonna listen to this, guys. So he's kind of letting them in on the joke that he's just using his madness as an excuse to be rude to Polonius. But it's not clear whether they've understood that that's what he's doing or not. So he says that he sees Polonius as a baby, and Rosencrantz says, oh yes, any old man is like a baby. And Hamlet says, I'm guessing that he's here to tell me that the actors have arrived. And Polonius comes in and says, yes, the actors have arrived. And he just keeps being really rude to Polonius. We'll just kind of skip through that. And then Hamlet brings up, with a biblical reference, brings up Ophelia again and says the daughter. And this, of course, just confirms to Polonius that Hamlet is mad for love, that he's obsessed with Ophelia. And then the actors come in, and Hamlet says, you are welcome, masters, welcome all.